All right, so convenience sampling is basically you picking anybody who's convenient and readily available to ask. So my guess is, being that the spot that you're in and that this is an assignment and some things like this and we have time limits, that a lot of your samples may boil down to convenience sampling, at least a little bit, because you're probably going to get data from populations that are convenient for you, that you have access to more easily. Self-selected samples, so you're only taking people who volunteer to do it, so that could cause some of ours to be slightly biased. A systematic sample. You guys read, like, if someone takes, like, every fifth person that walks through the door, or something like, if I wanted to survey my students, instead of just asking the ones who are here early or later or that I talk to a lot, it would be better for me to ask, like, I'm going to ask every third student that walks through the door at every period. Something like that. That randomizes it because I'm not selecting, right? The third person that walks in the door, that's who's selecting it, getting selected. So random sample really means that everybody's equally likely to be chosen. So some of you guys said, I will randomly ask people, and then I asked, like, what does it mean you will randomly ask people? Because you're going to pick them somehow. Some of you think something is random, and it's not really. Others of you, like, you might think, like, I'm just going to ask the people that sit around me at lunch. That's random. Well, it's not, because you sit in a certain spot. Okay, those people sit around you. That's not technically random. Okay, because is everybody equally likely to be chosen in that scenario? No, the people that eat lunch in the same area that you do would be a lot more likely to be chosen. So we might call it random because we think that's pretty random to just walk up and ask those people. But in the true definition, it's not, okay? And I'm not saying that you're not going to have some errors in doing that in your study. I'm saying that at the end, you should be able to identify if there were any of those types of things, okay? All right, so you guys can use a lot of this vocabulary when you're describing what happened in your study. All right, and then here are different ways that people can study. Observations, okay, so an observational study just means you're watching what would normally occur. Controlled experiment means you're running an experiment, but there's normally a control group. So how many of you in science have read about, like, the placebo effect or something like that? Yeah, so it's like when they want to test out, like, a drug and its effect on the population, they don't just take that drug and give it to people and say, like, wow, everybody felt better. That would be an experiment, but it wouldn't be controlled. We wouldn't know what to compare it to. So instead, they take a large population and they split it. Some people are actually getting the medicine. Some people are just getting a sugar pill, okay? And then that way, when they look at the results, if the people that felt better with the medicine isn't really significantly more than the people that felt better with the sugar pill, because sorry, but we all have a little bit of a mental thing, right? We might think we're feeling better even when we're not. Then they can kind of compare it, like these people took something. They probably actually will report that they felt a little bit better in some realm. Then your medicine should report a significantly greater, okay, amount than that. Otherwise, it might not really be doing that great of a job, and you might have to go back and look at it again. And what is significantly better, when you get deeper into statistics, like if you take an actual statistics class, you will learn how to measure how significant your results are compared to a control group or just compared to the normal population. Okay? And then in a survey, you're just asking a set of questions. So in your studies, you guys are all taking a survey, right? Because you're all going to somebody, asking them something, and collecting a number from them. Okay? Yeah. So each of these has pros and cons as far as making it random and not biased. Observationally, you have to make sure you're observing all different possibilities. Experiment-wise, you really have to make sure that you're selecting members that expose, like, the entire population that you're trying to study. Same as, like, when you select people to take your survey. Okay? All right. So the note guide is up. If you don't have the note guide, this is a lot of writing. Well, it's not, I don't know. It depends on the classes that you're in. Compared to what we're used to doing, this would be a lot of writing. It is up and has been up. So if you are going to go and print it out later, I would just label the example number. So this is section 11.8 if you didn't get the title at the beginning. I would label the example number and whether it's like part A or part B, and then just whatever our conclusion was, and then go fill that into the note-taking guide. If not, then you might want to write a little summary of what's happening in the problem so that you can understand what your answer was about. Okay. All right, so first scenario. So for each situation, we're saying what sampling method is used and if we can identify if the sample may have a bias. Okay? So a political candidate wants to know what percent of his constituency favors referendum A, whatever that is, of an upcoming ballot election. His staff asks each person who comes into the candidate's office for 3 days whether they support this referendum or not. CJ? Sure. Uh-huh. Okay. Good. So sampling method, he said it's convenient sampling. Do you guys agree or support what he's saying? Right? Are they going out there and really dividing the population into random samples and finding a way to do it? No. Basically, they're asking people that it's really easy access for them to ask, right? So it's definitely a convenient sample. Okay. Did you guys hear what he said the bias might be here? Somebody else repeat that for me. What is the bias in this situation that could possibly be occurring? Austin? Right. So how many people a day are going into this political candidate's office, depending on who he is, right? And what are their dealings with that candidate? Okay. How many of you are out there visiting people that you're totally opposed to their viewpoints and thinking of going into their office and visiting their camp? Probably not a lot of them. So probably whatever data they're getting, if that candidate supports this referendum, right, and his political party does, a lot of the people walking through that door are going to be supportive of that candidate or his political party and might share the same viewpoints. So you could see how they're probably not going to get data that's true of what's out there. They're just probably getting data of like people that associate with this candidate. Here's how they feel, and most of the people associating with him probably share the same views. Okay. All right, part B says, the manager of a grocery store wants to determine what percent of shoppers use store coupons. He asks every 10th shopper who passes through the store's door for the next week if he or she intends to use a store coupon on their visit. Okay? So what type of sampling do we think he's using? And do we believe that there's a bias in his sample? Alicia? Good. So it's really systematic, right? And is his sample pretty random? What's he trying to study? Shoppers at his store. And is he getting a good sample of people that shop at his store? Or he's doing it for a week, okay? Most of them will probably visit his store in a week that visit on a regular basis. Okay? He's not selecting who he's going to talk to. He's making it be the 10th person through the door, which is what makes it systematic, right? So is there any sort of bias that you would recognize in this, or do you feel like it's a good way for him to sample? Okay, so you might be able to make an argument for something like if you verbally ask someone like that they might just say yes. So maybe he would be better off if he put it in like a question they have to answer at like the register or something when they're keying something in. Okay. Is there any other sort of thing? Like, is he not getting the whole population, or do you guys feel like he's getting the whole population that he's studying? Right? He is. Yeah. But is that a sample that represents his population that he's trying to study, which are shoppers at his store? Probably, right? Because if I do every 10th person, I'll get people of all different ethnicities, age, socioeconomic demographics, right? Because I'm not selecting them in any way, shape, or form. Okay? So unless we think that people flat out, because you're asking them a question, might create their own bias, his survey is well set up for what he wants to study. Okay? Yes, Anna. And number one, constituency. Those are like, yeah. All right. Still, his survey would be biased because even studying his constituency, like those, like, you guys aren't 18, but I'll be perfectly honest with you. Not that I am representative of people politically super active in the community, but I have never gone to visit a candidate about anything, so I would never be surveyed in that. And I would bet that the majority of the population, supportive of the candidate or not, are not walking through office doors physically to go visit that candidate for something. Okay? All right, so in these examples, what we want to know is what study method describes each situation. Okay, so a little reminder of what the study methods were. Observational, are they doing a controlled experiment, or are they taking a survey? And then, should the sample statistics be used to make a general conclusion about the population? So would you look at this and say, like, oh, yeah, cool, that's good data about this population. I'm going to take this data and draw a conclusion. This is like what you guys are doing in your project. You guys are all taking a survey, right? And then you're going to get the data, and you're going to analyze the data, and you're going to interpret what it means. But then you're going to say whether that's reliable or not based on what you see happening in your survey. Were you not random enough? Did you not really study the right population? Or was everything perfect? Those are things you're going to want to identify. Okay? So part A, scientists study the effects of the phases of the moon on the levels of low tide and high tide in 200 coastal cities in the U.S. for a period of 12 months. So first of all, what kind of study are they doing here? Good, an observational study. They're just looking at what normally happens and recording results. Would you guys feel, if they published the results of their study and what their data analysis said, that you could rely on the conclusions here based on their data? What do you guys think? Austin?
I would say it depends on what the cities were, and if they're generalizing just about the U.S., it would just necessarily affect cities in the moon or about the rest of the world.
Okay, good idea. So that would be a good identification. Oh, so it's 200 coastal cities in the U.S. So let's say that we're just going to make some conclusions about the U.S. Okay. Alicia? Okay, good. So like Austin said, and like Alicia's pointing out, we'd want to know that the cities were on both the East Coast and the West Coast. Okay? If you knew that, would you say their study is good? Are they getting a lot of data? Yeah, because they didn't do like 10 cities. They did 200 cities, right? Are they getting data over a long period of time? Yeah, they didn't watch it for 2 weeks and be like, here's what happens with the tides, right? That would be really seasonal, and some things like that would come into play. But to watch it for a whole year, so you've gone through an entire cycle of seasons and all of these things, you've watched over 200 cities, they have a huge pile of data that they're looking at. So I agree with you guys. As long as they're taking cities from both coasts, and we're looking at the U.S., this would be a reliable way for us to look at the study. Their results would be good, and we would be able to use them and depend on them to draw some conclusions about what happens with the moon and the tides. Okay? What about part B? A pet food company randomly chooses 2 groups of 20 puppies for a study. One group eats a new brand of dog food, and the other group eats an off-brand dog food for a period of 4 weeks. Researchers record muscular and skeletal growth rates in both groups. Okay, so first of all, what kind of study are they doing? Damien?
Controlled experiment.
Okay, so they're doing a controlled experiment. All right, and what do you guys think about the reliability of their results? Zeke?
They have to specify what kind of dog, what breeds of dogs they're using.
Yeah, breeds of dogs is a big one, right? What if in one group ended up all these little small teeny dogs, and they're recording their muscular and skeletal growth, and then in the other group you have these much larger breed dogs that are meant to do some different things, and they're recording their skeletal and muscular growth, right? Because they didn't really say that they made sure there was different equal amounts of each breed, or they were only studying one breed. We would definitely have to know some of that information. Okay, good. So also, 4 weeks maybe really isn't that long enough of a time to establish that it was that dog food that was really making the difference in the dog's diet. Okay. And also, how many puppies are used in this study? 2 groups of 20, so 40 puppies total. not really a huge sample, right? Like that's another reason why our studies might be a little bit inconclusive. I'm making you guys gather 50 pieces of data, and though to you guys it's like, whew, I have to get 50 people to answer this question, and I understand that. That's why you get a week to do it and all this kind of stuff. Really, if you wanted to study the teenage population, is 50 people going to really do it for you? Probably not, okay? So this is a relatively small sample. Look at the one above it when they were just doing an observational study and there's a limited amount of space, right, along the coast. They were at least picking 200 cities when they were limited by this space. There's a lot more than 200 dogs out there, and this group only chose like 40. It's a relatively small sample. So the reliability of these these results, I don't know. I would read it maybe, and I'd be like, that's great. Are you guys going to do another study where you actually like spend more time with more dogs and tell me what breeds you're using and stuff like that, okay? We probably couldn't draw like a true conclusion from their data. All right, part C. For a class project, students in health class ask every 10th student entering the school if they eat breakfast each morning. Okay. All right, so what kind of study is this? A survey, okay. All right, and what do you guys think about the reliability of their results? Nicole? Good. Okay, so you can only make a conclusion about this population if, like a lot of you guys, their conclusion is about the population at school. Do we feel like their study is reliable? Yeah, they're like standing at the gates of the school, and like every 10th person that enters the school, they're getting a piece of data from them. Okay, so if you did that at a school here that runs about 3,000 students, you wouldn't have 50 pieces of data. Assuming everybody was walking in that day and you asked every 10th person, you would have 300 pieces of data to look at. So you'd have a lot of data. You'll have surveyed the entire population, so to speak, randomly, but you didn't choose what random meant, right? It was systematic, so you made sure you were getting a sampling of all different types of people. So like Nicole said, it would have to be specific to studying like high schoolers, okay? But this would be a good way to get a sample of that high school population, okay? Any questions about what we've discussed here? No? Okay, so last thing we're going to look at. All right, which is kind of what you guys did, and then some of you still need help with this. Some of you, through the process of looking at the data you were trying to collect and how you were answering your question, really did try to eliminate some bias. So let's say the City Planning Commission is considering widening a thoroughfare through the center of town to relieve traffic jams. What sampling method could you use to find the percent of city drivers who would favor a change to the thoroughfare? What survey question would you ask to avoid bias? So the first is, how would you collect your data? This is like what I asked you guys on the last checkpoint of our project, right? I wanted to know what question you were asking and how you were planning on collecting your data. And now you can see why. This is how we would decide if a study seemed reliable or not, is based on how are they collecting their data and what is it that they're asking to get the data. So first of all, what do you think would be a good idea if you were in charge of this for the city? How would you structure how you're going to collect your data to find out? It says you want to know the percent of city drivers who would favor a change to the thoroughfare. So what's the population you want to study? City drivers, okay? So what do you think is a good way for you to get a sampling of city drivers that is reflective of the population? How would you go about it? Would you just ask all the drivers that you knew? Do you think that would be reflective of the city's population? Probably not. A little convenience in there, right? Just asking the people that you knew. So what would be a way that you could set this up to really make sure that you were getting information that wasn't biased? Damien? Okay, so we have to make sure it's random. So how could we structure it to really make it random? So like those of you that wrote, I will ask random people on the checkpoint, know that I wrote back, like, how are you selecting those people? Because we say random, but like I said, that means to you, like, oh, when I sit down at lunch today, I'm just going to randomly walk up to these people over here and ask them. That's not really random because it's more convenience for you. So how would we really construct it to be a random sampling? CJ? Okay, so would you make sure that way that you've only included drivers? So if you put it on a ballot, anyone who's old enough to vote can vote. And they might be people that aren't drivers. So if you're just trying to monitor the drivers, how do you narrow down the group so that you're just asking drivers, but so that you're getting a completely random sample of them that's enough data? Keelan? Okay, so fair enough. Take every fifth person that walks into the DMV. Now, if this town was starting from scratch and everyone had to go visit the DMV for their license, that would totally work. But do you know how many times I've visited the DMV since I've gotten my driver's license when I was 16? Once. Yeah. Okay? So not a bad idea, but because of the way our system is set up, not everyone hanging out at the DMV, like most people don't ever have to actually go in person to the DMV, but maybe once or twice in their entire life. Yes? Okay, so you could ask someone going into a public parking lot. So you would at least then narrow it down to drivers. But there would still be this idea of, are you including every driver? Matt?
You go to like gas stations around the whole city.
Gas stations around the whole city? Okay, these aren't bad ideas. Yeah, CJ? How much traffic is there? Right, okay. That's fair. That's fair. Any other ideas? Zeke? I'm sure they would be really happy about answering your survey question when they're pulled over by a police officer. And I'm sure having a police officer ask them would not intimidate them in any way for their answer one way or another. All right, so those aren't bad ideas. Let me give you an idea of what they said you could do to give you guys an idea of how to do a completely random sample. So first of all, you would need to know what the entire driver population is. So they would say get some sort of list that has every licensed driver in that town on it, right? And then how would you choose who you're going to ask from the list? So how have we seen what really makes things completely random? What are some ways that we've seen people decide who they're going to ask that really makes it random? Anna? Yeah, systematic selection, because that kind of takes your brain out of the equation. And I don't know about you guys, but even if I have really good intentions, even if I decided to do a systematic sample and that fifth person looked really scary to ask that I was supposed to ask, I'd be like, well, maybe I'll just ask the one after them. Yeah, like something like that, right? But then that's not completely random because I am selecting then the person that I want to ask. I'm eliminating part of the population based on my own bias because I think that part of the population looks scary to go ask a question or something like that, right? So a systematic way is usually a great way to get a random sample because you are not selecting, okay? It is selecting your system, and you have to ask those people. You can't cheat it, like I said, okay? So if you could get a list of them and select like every 10th, depending on how much data you want, or every 5th driver on the list, and call them and ask them, then that's something that you could do, okay? And again, the other ideas were good ideas. You guys were trying to think of places where you could get the mass quantity of drivers in the community and ask them. But all of those things create small things of bias because it's like places that you've chosen, you're probably familiar with them. Things like that come into play, okay? All right, so what would be the survey question you would ask them once you had this method down? So you decide on this really fair method of who you're going to ask to survey a random sample of this population of city drivers, and then how would you pose your question if you want to know what they think about this so that it has no bias in it? So if this was your survey question for your project, how would you ask it? What do you want to know the answer to? About the thoroughfare, right? If they want it wider. Okay. So you call up the person, they answer the phone, you say, hello, I'm doing a survey to collect data on what city drivers think about this issue. Would you please answer this one question? And then how would you ask them the question? Just throw something out there. It's not that bad. Awesome.
Take it from the question. Would you favor a change to the thoroughfare?
Okay, good. Okay, so would you favor a change to the thoroughfare? Now, we might want to be just a little more specific, and I totally thank you for throwing it out there, because that's what I was waiting for someone to do. Okay, what is it specifically that we're considering doing? Widening it. Good. Would you favor a widening of the thoroughfare? That's it. Do I sound like I care one way or the other? No, I'm just asking them. I don't say, wouldn't it be great if the thoroughfare was wider? Thanks, okay? I just say, would you favor this widening of the thoroughfare? So I do list what I want to do, because that's what I'm trying to find data about, okay? But I ask it in a very objective way, so that their answer is their answer without my influence. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, so that's basically what this section was about.